He had a slightly, more active position. He was down a pawn, but he just moves and he just pokes and prods in ways that people cannot handle, even the best of the best, like Maxime Vachier-Lagrave.
And the thing to remember is that Magnus does make mistakes, right? He gets down to 30 seconds or whatever. He does make inaccuracies, but even after he does, he takes his foot off the gas pedal for 1 second. He puts it right back on. It seemed like MVL was out of the woods when he took that second pawn on b4, Robert, because it looked like that was the only way Black was going to win. And all of a sudden, Magnus switches gears at the drop of a hat. He starts to play for checkmate, and he starts to play for a kingside attack. Just an exquisite display by the world champion, and he is back up by 1.
Unbelievable technique. I mean, it's just freakish the way he's able to beat players in those positions. We're back to the opening we've seen in multiple games. And unfortunately for Maxime, he hasn't had time to look at this with an engine to prepare it because he keeps going back to it. And we see the advantage is in White's favor, 0.7, but it's kind of a nagging 0.7. We see the problems in Black's position game after game, the C file, the C6 square, but he strikes with B5. Danya, do you like that move?
Well, he's setting up the pawn rhombus on the queen side. I think it's an interesting approach because he's forcing Magnus to make a decision right away. Now, Magnus can actually keep the tension by bringing the bishop back. That's kind of a Magnus move if I've ever seen one. Just go bishop a1, keep your options as open as possible. If you take on b5, I don't know how you're going to follow that up. Black seems to have all of the squares, all of the key squares on the c file defended. In particular, the c5 square is the one that you want to keep under lock and key if you're Maxime.
And you mentioned the c5 square. I was going to say, if White plays c5, you close down the queen side. That's where your activity has to come from. So a good decision to trade. And wow, b4, an unexpected move from my point of view. But the knight can go b1 to c3 or b3 into c or a5, causing Black some problems. But that b4 pawn done, if AB, and rook a4, for example, is that b4 pawn that long for this board?
I think that's a great point. I also think after AB2 can play at that game. Black can go 98 d6 to c4, and he actually might be faster. And I'm pretty sure that Magnus might have only considered the other knight jumping into c4, and he realizes that that's not possible. What about the f6 knight? Hey, I want to join the party too.
98 is a brilliant rerouting move, and I would think that Wesley So would spot an instant. He did that really well in his match against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave in the quarterfinals. But 98, it just feels difficult because you want to make a move like rook a4 or rook a2 or knight b6, but all those have drawbacks. Even if you could play rook a4 takes b4 in one turn, there's bishop a3 to follow, winning the e7 pawn. And Maxime finds the move that you pointed out, knight to e8 to d6 to c4.
And here we go, the classic scenario, both knights reaching for the outpost, and which knight is going to be more effective. Knight c4 comes with tempo, and now if you wanted to, you could support it with knight d7 to b6.
This position gives me a headache. There's too much happening on the C-file. It's too clogged up. What do you attack? That's the big question. The reason why Maxime does not take on c5 is, well, actually, White can take with either pawn, but b takes c5 gives White a protected pass pawn. We talked about connect 4, f2 to c5. That's an impressive pawn chain. And now as you're highlighting, knight to a4 is the threat. God. The b5 pawn is protected. Knight a4, if you take on a4, b takes
okay,
a4.
3.
Oh, gosh. Where's the
I think Magnus is the one who needs an Excedrin because he is stumbling around here. Back to b1. D1 he goes. The good news for White is, to your point, there isn't all that much to attack on the queen side. So believe it or not, White is still pretty solid, but he's incredibly cramped. And there's no question that Maxime is firmly in the driver's seat. He's going to double on the a-file. He might play knight b6 to a4. And you got to be really careful there not to get your queen trapped if you're Carlsen.
Magnus has almost no moves, it feels like, right? Black is having all the fun here. He plays knight d5. He's like, let's get some pieces off the board. If you take with your knight on e5, you win the pawn on that square. Knight e5, d takes, bishop takes. We swap everything, but the b5 pawn is loose. So what Magnus is claiming is, I have less space. My pieces are restricted. Let's get some trades going. That way I have more room to breathe.
And this is the kind of nagging, annoying move that is 100 times more annoying when it's played by the world champion, right? You start doubting yourself. Am I really better? Or is my opponent getting a lot of activity here? A big decision to be made for MVL. What are the candidate moves here? I don't really like knight takes c5 unless he finds a convincing follow-up. I thought about an exchange sack on c3, but that just doesn't look very effective. What else comes to mind? Maybe a slow move like rook to a2, just try to intensify the pressure. Maybe even f6. He does take on e5.
Whoa. But you were correct again. It was not the right decision. The liquidation helps Magnus's pieces breathe. And now the queen goes into b2. But what a queen d4?
Or bishop c6 and b5.
That's even better. It looks like you attack the rook, push the pawn. Now you have an outside passer.
But I love your move as well. I think queen d4 equalizes comfortably. Bishop d3. A lot of puzzling decisions here, Robert, in this middle game.
Yeah, so he gets the trade, and now we're going to trade queens. And
draw.
Well, you can never say draw when Magnus Carlsen is playing, but this position does look like we're going to see queen b4, knight takes d5.
I think in that position we could say draw, although I would still be quivering in my boots if I was playing Magnus with black. You could have a rook and 3 against rook and 3, and I would be nervous.
You could have just king versus king, and I'm still shivering in my boots.
Hey, maybe he found a win.
But in all seriousness, queen b4, knight takes d5. It's mass liquidation. It means the game will peter out into a draw. Everything defended, no weaknesses. So queen, 2 rooks, and 4 pawns per side. So I think right now, Maxime is saying, I feel like I should be better. I was better. Let me find something. But ultimately, there's nothing.
It'll peter out into a draw. It will pall out into a draw. However you want to put it, E5 by MVL. I think he's still playing ambitiously. I think he's saying, hey, I don't just want to draw. I want to equalize the match before the halftime break. And Magnus can't just, sloppily take on B3 because he's going to be a pawn down in that position and it's not going to be easy to draw. He has to move the knight. But wait a second, then black takes B4.
Wow, I guess we underestimated the chances here.
Rook C6.
Oh, that's clever. That's
Sorry
really,
to cut
really
you
clever.
off, Robert.
No. I was going to say we underestimated the chance here, but even that isn't so clear, right? E takes F4, rook takes B6, we swap queens, E3 is loose. Like, that's something that, there's still some activity there for black that white will have to handle properly. That said, if rook C6 is played, with all the pieces getting traded off, of course, that gives Magnus great chances to hold.
And I would argue that if rook C6 is in fact played, and I think it will be played, we're likely to get a liquidation on the queen side and a 3-on-2 on the king side, which, given the pawn structure, which is totally fine, should be pretty easily holdable for Magnus. I can guarantee you he's calculating rook c6 right now, and he's played it. Good stuff by the world champion. I think this is the way to hold this position.
You sound like Charles Barkley there. I guarantee it. And he plays it. Rook c6, hits the knight on b6. And if you remove the guard of the d5 pawn, down it goes. But what we were talking about is if e takes f4, the rook takes that knight on b6, the queens get traded, e3 pawn is captured. Why I start seeing some chances for black is if the rooks can get on the second rank there, then that white king feels uncomfortable. I don't think you're in time. I think that black doesn't get those winning chances that you would desire. So rook c6 was an excellent, excellent choice.
It was, and if you think about it, in the resulting endgame, white could easily plop a rook on the second rank when the time is right, either offering a rook trade if black beats him to the punch, or just guarding the second rank from both of black's rooks. MVL looking for a way to muddy the waters here, but I think he's just got to take the queen. And no, he doesn't. He goes rook b8. Okay.
Wait,
whoa.
Magnus
there must have been a better move. I think what Magnus is saying is that he's got a lot of piece activity here. He's going to go knight c3.
Okay, I buy the activity, but I also love an extra pawn, and it's a healthy pawn at that.
It is, and MVL could support that extra pawn with rook b8 to d8. He needs to properly apportion the work for his rooks. He goes rook c4.
Yeah, and if you take d takes c4, he goes rook d6. Now there's no knight c3.
Rook b1. He blundered a piece.
Oh my goodness.
And knight d7, rook takes b8, and rook d8.
Oh my gosh.
No way, you can't do that.
He simply blundered a full knight here.
And the knight can just move away from e2. Knight g3, and it's not totally over. You can make a couple more moves, but Magnus is not letting this one out of the bag.
It's a full piece. That is shocking. And the reason why is the king is on f8. If the king were on g7, black stays in this because not only is there knight d7, there's knight c8, where you lose the rook on b8, but you take the rook on d6. But knight c8 is met by rook takes b8 with a pin of the knight on the last rank.
Oh, and that's such bad luck. And this is the ultimate bad luck. Rook d8 check. Without that move, black would have been totally fine. And they're still going to try. These positions are not the easiest to win, Robert. And I've even seen like knight in 3 versus rook in 3 get butchered. But something tells me Magnus is not going to let this one slip. Maybe even f4 should be considered here.
What you're trying to do is carve out the d4 square for your knight. He goes h4, similar. He wants to reroute that knight to the g5 square, something like that eventually. But knight f1, it's a slow process. You have to play g3, king g2. The one thing you don't want for white is to trade all of the pawns.
Make a move, MBO.
No, he's done. He's like, I'm done with this game.
Done.